The overall inflation was 3.2% over the last 12 months. And honestly, I think in car insurance, it's probably gone way more than that. Actually, if you look at your last policy from last renewal, odds are you're 20% more. And if you look at the renewal before that, you're probably 10 to 15% more than the year before. Since 2020 to 2025 and ongoing, the insurance costs have just gone up. Essentially, what has happened is there's been a lot of changes. 2020, we know what happened there. When we came out, a lot of us just didn't know how to drive anymore. It was crazy. There's a lot more deaths, a lot more claims, a lot more accidents. On top of the cost of repairs were higher. The mechanics cost of the labor was higher. Getting the parts took twice as long. The rental cars used longer to use. And in general, the overall explosion of the car insurance world, you're seeing 20 to 50% more than what you were paying 5 years ago. So what are the common mistakes that people are making in order to try to get this price lower? It starts with looking at what your policy coverage is. And that's also the reason that everything's gone up. When you're looking at your liability limits, that's the most important piece of your insurance. Right now, it's a sue happy world, and if you cause an accident to me, you damage my life, anything that happens, I'm going after your insurance, and if there's not enough, I'm going after you. That's why insurance is important, because you don't want them to go after you. You want to have enough in your premium that they would only need to go after the insurance. That should essentially cover your rear end if something does happen. So the benefit is most states have ramped up the liability limits. They've said you have to carry at least $50,000 per person, which used to be the norm, and now because of inflation, because of cost, the material, all of the things, the medical is even higher at the hospitals. So what they've done is they've said, okay, our state realizes that you can't go to the hospital for 4 hours and expect to walk out of there with only a $5,000 bill. It's going to be $50,000, $10,000, whatever their scenario is, and they've based their minimums that you have to carry on that situation. But is that enough to cover you correctly? That's where people make a large mistake, where they lower their liability limits, which is probably the biggest cost that could essentially happen. When you have an accident, it's a lower risk. The odds of you getting injured, at least over 50,000 or 100,000 or even 250,000, is very low. There's about a 3 to 10, in some states, maybe a 30% chance. But if you have a 30% chance of getting injured or injuring someone else, you don't want to lose everything you've worked for the past 10, 15 plus years just because of one claim. So looking at your liability limits, make sure that you try to max those out. That is, unfortunately, in some states, the biggest cost in insurance. In some states, not so much. When you go to Michigan, they have the medical already covered under the personal injury protection. You don't have a choice, you gotta carry it, so it's already part of that policy. Raising those liability limits up to the $500,000 limit isn't that expensive because you're already paying a lot for the medical. In other states like Texas or Alabama or Florida, the medical isn't typically covered. Florida, there is a little bit of personal injury protection there, not enough. So in that case, raising those liability limits, the costs have gone up significantly for the bodily injury. But Mark, what about the car? Honestly, the car doesn't matter that much. It matters as far as thefts. There are way more thefts. The material, the metal, all of the things, it does matter. Hyundai's been stolen more than most cars lately. BMW used to, Honda used to be that way for a while. So there's certain years and models that were very highly sought after or easy to steal. In those cases, those models are going to be more expensive because of the theft. Total losses are really the only thing that they care about because they don't know. If they get into an accident with a deer, they know the numbers. 50% are half of the value of the car, so we know half of the value of the car, what's the risk, how much does it cost. They do all the math in the back end, the thing. That's why working with an independent agent is usually the best route to go, because those independent agents, whether they know it or not, they're trying to get you the best deal. They're shopping all these different companies for you at no cost to you, at least in 99% of the states. Then you can find the better company, but they're finding those prices, and the reason those prices are typically good, hopefully not because it's just a cheap company. There are some out there. Be careful with that. Do your research. But in that scenario, they're finding companies because you're a good fit for certain scenarios. This location, this car, your age, your credit, your insurance score, all of those pieces packaged up for company A may be really good For company B, not so much. That's why one company is typically more expensive than another. Again, it can be just that the company's cheap and they don't pay out claims and you fight them all day long and they just know that, and that's a bad scenario. That's where the insurance gets that bad rap. In those cases, you've got to be very careful. I do put a lot of those on this channel where there are the 10 worst companies. I'll link that at the end, and the 10 best companies. If you're not familiar with which ones to go with, I'll put a link in the description below where you can work with an independent agent to help you work and shop through different companies, but also they're not going to likely work with some of those lower end companies and kind of give you that advice of what coverages, to price, to the company, whether it's a fit for you or not. Links in the description below. Otherwise, the second piece you've got to be careful about is your actual day-to-day. What I mean by that is the number of tickets you have if you get a DUI, if you have an at-fault accident. Because all of those things that we mentioned, the price has gone up 20, 15%, all of those are because the risks have changed. The risks have gotten higher. Yes, some states are because of weather. That's just a piece that we can't control, and that inflated a handful of things. But again, when we got out of 2020, going into 2022, 3, 4, and it's gotten better every year. So you can actually see the risks now that we've been driving a lot more. We're getting better at the cars are starting to warn us that people are in our blind spots. Things like that have gotten better. So the prices are starting to be less of a risk, but they're still high because of that. Now, if you add a ticket to your driving history, you add a DUI to your driving history, you add any of those scenarios, now you're at risk of really high prices. You can take that 30%, 40%, double it, sometimes even triple it. Again, there are companies that are specialized with those. So now your local independent agent can at least give you advice if that is the scenario. Typically, if they're not competitive, they'll tell you who likely would be. There are high-risk companies that are going to be a fit. So how do you fight that? If you don't want to go with that state-appointed company or you got to get assistance for that, how do you get your own insurance without going crazy on the price? There are ways to cut down the prices. Part of it might be the liability. A lot of it could be the vehicle. Sometimes when you raise your deductible, that can make all the difference in costs. If you have a $250 deductible, maybe make it a $500 deductible. If you have a $500 deductible, maybe you make it $1,000. That's essentially you saying, I'm going to pay the first $1,000 in any claim that I cause that's covered under my insurance. So here's $1,000. I'm sorry, it was a $1,500 claim. Odds are you're not going to file it now because it's not worth having the price go up again another $1,000 because you wanted to save $500. So in those scenarios, it's essentially forcing you to think back and say, should I file this claim? Is it worth it? What does my agent say? What's the advice that I can get? I actually just had this same scenario happen, got a text message from a customer, said, hey, someone hit my daughter's mirror and it broke off, and they sent me a picture of it, and I said, how much is that to fix? They said, for $2,500. I'm like, holy crap, it was really expensive. It was a nice car. So in that case, it's probably worth filing because the rate increase that they're gonna have isn't gonna be as much as the cost to repair the car. Now they had a $1,000 deductible, so it was like, oh man, do we wanna pay $1,000 to get $2,500? So there's a $1,500 difference between the two. But my insurance in my state, it was a state that raises rates for anything. And that's the state, not the insurance company. The state has allowed, and pretty much everyone does that. So let's say a 10% increase. Okay, yeah, it's worth it. I'm still gonna net $1,000 back in my pocket for that scenario, and after 3 years, it falls off. Now that actually, the reason we leaned more towards that was because that wasn't even all the damage, so there was still stuff to be seen. And in that case, it makes sense to file. Now, if you're in a different state where that doesn't matter, let's say Tennessee, for example, you go have that claim and it doesn't raise your rate, and you have a $500 deductible, it's an $800 repair, it probably doesn't make sense to have an $800 claim to where you're gonna have to pay $500 of it anyways. It's to each their own. That's where you get to decide whether it's worth it. That's where an agent will come in and give you the advice to let you decide. Don't let them bully you into a decision. This is your call. But at the end of the day, you get to make that choice. The other way to combat that is to shop around. Again, there's a link in the description below. If you are shopping around, work with an independent agent in your local area. They can shop multiple companies. It really depends on you, your household, because that makes the biggest difference. how many drivers have access to the car, what's your insurance score, how many claims are in the house. All of these pieces make up that profile, and that profile the agent's gonna take to different companies, usually what we call a rater, where they plug it into one. It just tells you all of the companies that would be competitive, and they go through the coverages to say, hey, I know that company, they don't pay claims very well. Do you want to save an extra $5 a month, or do you want to go with the company that is known for paying good claims and actually have the right policy and pay the extra $5? So choices, right? So they're going to give you those options that you can decide what's the best fit. The last piece you can do is start to ask for discounts. Agents do get busy and they forget about things, and discounts, at least in my opinion, is one of the most important pieces because it saves you the extra money. You might be part of a motorcycle club, a credit union member, if you have an alumni membership or college four-year degree, things like that. There's different discounts for everybody. And most companies at least offer some sort of a discount that it will give you 5, 10, 15%. If you add renters or a home, you're gonna add 20 to 30% off. So there's all of these discounts that you could apply for. Just ask your agent if there are other discounts that you might be missing and have them just review it. It doesn't hurt. Sometimes rerunning your insurance score on a renewal can help. There's all of these pieces, and there are videos if you wanna go more in depth on those in this channel. I'll link at the end. But the biggest thing that you can do today is focus on credit. I know credit's probably the insurance should never touch credit. They don't technically touch credit, but the easiest way for you to understand is it's based on credit. It matters on your claims, your tickets, your credit. That's all built into one thing that's called an insurance score. And that, I don't know why I pointed there, but an insurance score is essentially, this is your insurance score. Just imagine it's something cool. And your insurance score plays a very large factor on the cost. It adds to the risk or reduces the risk. Location, vehicle, all those things build up with that insurance score can help you the most. That's something that you can do now to start working on getting better insurance if you don't have great insurance today. Just be careful of the agents that want to get you on the phone and off the phone in 7 minutes or less, and they want to give you that cheapest rate because what they're doing is they're cutting your liability, they're cutting your coverages, they're raising your deductibles without you being aware. And don't get me wrong, they tell you. There's ways that they've done it. I've lived the world of quick quotes and quick sales where we sell 10, 15, 20 policies a day, which in the independent world, that's amazing. That's awesome. If I could get an agent that could sell 20 policies in a day, that would be the perfect world. But odds are they're just selling you the cheapest thing they can find because they know if you buy the cheapest thing, you're gonna be happy until you have a claim. When you have a claim, you're gonna realize I had good liability limits, now I don't. I had full coverage on my car that had a low deductible, now I don't. And all of those pieces that you have to be a little bit careful with. The biggest, most important thing that you can do is find an agent that you actually trust. You don't have to go in the description below. You don't have to fill out a quote there. But if you have a local agent that you know and you can trust and they can give you that advice, then in that case, that's probably more powerful than all of these pieces put together. If you don't have an agent to work with, your next step is to find out what coverages you should carry if you're not familiar with those. I've got my Car Insurance 101 there that's gonna help. If you want to know, like I mentioned, those companies to stay away from, here's a list of the top worst companies. Probably one of my more popular videos that people have watched on the channel. I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.